Overall, the government estimates that 3.2 million families will be worse off as a result of the benefit reforms by 2030, while 3.8 million families will be better off. The government says it will invest $1 billion in what it calls high-quality, tailored and personalised support to help people who can work back into employment. A number of changes have also been announced, which the government hopes will break the link between trying to get into work and losing benefits. A new right to try system will mean people will not be financially penalised if they take a job which doesn't work out. Devon Galani, who is the director of a social policy and analytical company called Policy and Practice, he works with local authorities and has been looking at the potential impact of the changes across the county and country. Good morning, Devon is joining me right now. How are you expecting people in Somerset to be affected by the benefit changes?
Good morning, Mel, and sorry to be the bearer of bad news, because I think our job is to try and understand the impact of these big national policies on not just local areas, but also the individuals who are impacted by them. And we think there's about 6,000 people in receipt of personal independence payment in Somerset, just over actually, who are potentially at risk when they come to be reassessed. It's important not to be alarmist. There's going to be time, these reforms aren't coming in immediately, and they're going to be people aren't reassessed every year. It happens over time. So it's not. I don't want your listeners to be panicking about these changes right now. But there's another group as well. So people in receipt of limited capability for work-related activity. That's a part of universal credit, of whom there are about 19,000 people who are potentially at risk. So 2/3 of those, around 13,000, who are getting limited capability for work-related activity today. And the remaining 1/3 who are at risk of not getting it in the future because the eligibility criteria is changing and it's being tied to whether or not you qualify for personal independence payments in the future.
Now,
so those are the big changes, and the economic impact in Somerset, we think, is likely to be over £50 million. So it's going to have an impact on the local economy as well.
Yeah, you did mention before about people being worried. I think they will be worried hearing what you're saying. And obviously your organisation doesn't just look at the impact on individuals, but the potential knock-ons that you mentioned there with the likely impact on Somerset Council and also Somerset as a whole.
Yeah, I think there are two big things. So firstly, I think with disability benefits, people actually spend them. They use the money. They use the money to pay for carers. They use the money to get about for taxis or for other form of transport. And it isn't just the financial impact as well. If they're currently paying for their care and they feel less able to do that, that has implications for friends and family members or their support network, who sometimes, that might mean that they have to step in and provide some of that care informally instead. So I think that's the first big thing to think about is the impact on people's lives. And then the second big thing, which a lot of local authorities have contacted us about, which is why we have done this analysis effectively, is the knock-on impacts on things like adult social care services. There are two big effects, I think, here. One, firstly, a lot of people pay for their care today and using personal independence payment or LCWRA, and they will struggle to do that in the future if they lose that, right? So that might mean the local authority then has to pick up the cost of that care. I think the second one, and probably more concerning, is the risk that currently people use that money to stay and live independently for longer, stay active, stay healthy for longer. That's what that support is there to do. And if that isn't kind of properly managed with the right levels of alternative support, like aids and adaptations or proper employment support that kind of takes place for people's incomes, there's a risk that could lead to people, not staying as well for longer, and that could increase the demand for social care, and that will have impacts on obviously the people impacted, but also it means the government savings are likely to be less than anticipated.
Now, the government, it wants more people with disabilities to get jobs. Do you feel that the infrastructure and the opportunities and also the support are out there to make this actually a success? Do you think it can happen?
So there are two fairly big things the government is doing. So one is it's putting more money into health and social care. So I think what we want to do is make sure that money is being used effectively, that people can actually access the aids and adaptations that help them to live independently for longer. For that to be kind of shown to be working, because I think we hear people who struggle to access that today because of the funding pressures that local authorities and the NHS are under. The second big one is employment support, and I think we heard your the chap beforehand who I think alerted you to our analysis talk a bit about, well, where are the jobs going to come from that these people are going to be moving into, and I think that has a big impact in different parts of the country. So somewhere like Taunton, which is a little bit more, well, Somerset in general, which is a little bit more rural, you need to be able to get around, get to the jobs that are available. The government is investing money in employment support, but I think it's not as straightforward as pumping the money in and people will then get jobs. I think it's obviously a lot more complicated than that. So the government is doing stuff, but what I want the government to think about is to make sure that support is as effective as possible. And that's one of the things we try and help local authorities to do, is to try and help them, identify the people who are at risk and contact them about the support that's available for them. And that could be financial support to try and make up some of what's at risk of being lost through personal independence payments. So things like social tariffs from your utility company, or for older people, pension credit attendance allowance, which can, if they're better able to pay for their care, that might free up some resources for people of working age who are at risk from these reforms. And also just engage them in things like employment support and let them know that actually if they need aids and adaptations, the council is there to help them access that support. So there are kind of very practical things that, again, I think it's for local authorities and other support institutions to be doing to help people through these changes. And it's not all set in stone. So there's quite a lot unclear about what the government's actually going to do. And I think they would point that out and say, actually, let's try not to, again, let's not be alarmist, but I think what we want to do is make sure that they've thought about all of these knock-on implications. Firstly on whether they'll make the savings that they expect, but also ultimately the people who are impacted, at risk of being impacted by these changes.
Well, I think you've answered my final question, really, which was, Devon, it was going to be about your final message to the government this morning. Anything else?
Yeah, I think we're calling for three things. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. I think we're calling for three things. Firstly, that, again, these reforms, the support that the government's putting in place is in place, and it's shown to be effective, and people are able to access it easily, and it's making a difference, because without that, I think it's hard to see these changes as being anything other than zero sum, so money out of people's pockets. I think the second big thing is we want to see the most heavily impacted people protected. So some people at risk of losing both personal independence payment and the health element of universal credit, LCWRA, which would be an impact on income of over £9,000 a year. We think that's too much of a hit for some people to be at risk of, and actually you could protect those, particularly those on universal credit who don't have the means otherwise, and actually you could retain the current eligibility criteria for that group, so they can keep the health element of universal credit at least, which will at the very least soften the blow of the worst impacts. And finally, just to think very carefully about the impact of these reforms on people, which I'm sure, again, the government would say they have done and they are doing, and the numbers have gone up, and it's important for that support to be in place. But it does feel a little bit like the government's trying to make it's forcing these changes through to make savings to meet an arbitrary deadline. And I think it's important that before they do anything like that, they make sure the reforms are effective in the first place, because otherwise they're just going to have knock-on impacts elsewhere, which, one, can devastate people's lives, and two, means the savings that the government expects to achieve won't be anything like what they've promised.
Well, Devon, thank you very much for joining us this morning. That is Devon Galani right there from the social policy and analytical company Policy and Practice.